This is a classic example of what a set of tongs should not look like. And I hope that wasn't found on a Sedco rig, because that's a disgrace. Tongs that are in this kind of condition are hard on the people, it's hard on the equipment, but most of all, it's dangerous.
The smooth, quick operation of tongs is no accident. It takes two basic elements, know-how and a well-maintained tool. If either of these is missing, you can look awfully bad. You just heard the president of Sedco's drilling division comment on this set of tongs. Yeah, they're dangerous, and they're a waste of valuable time. The extra time and effort spent trying to make them latch and bite can make the drill floor a difficult place to be, especially if you're the one on the receiving end of the driller's bark. These two basic elements, know-how and a well-maintained tool, are signs of an efficient operation, and there's really no excuse for their absence on a Sedco rig. Know-how is something that you just have to develop. It comes from years of experience, and Sam here has a lot of that. Before he came to work for Sedco, he had about 10 years experience, so he and Pete have agreed to demonstrate the use of these tongs. Ready, guys? Oh, no! Pete, you blew it. Always keep your hands away from the jaws, and especially the latch, until the tongs have been latched. There are handles on the tongs. Use them. Sam should be able to latch the tongs without your help, Pete. But if your tongs are heavy and unmanageable, Pete should stand back by the lever and help push the tongs into place. When you're lifting the tongs into place, lift by the jaw handles and avoid smashed fingers. To make the tongs bite, grab the latch handle and the hanger or lever handle and pull. Once the tongs have a good bite, keep clear of the lever or you could get hurt if the tongs slip or the snub line breaks. Now, know exactly where you're supposed to be standing, because a slip or a broken line can put a guy in the hospital or worse. Once the tongs have a good bite, clear out of the way of the tong arms until the pipe is broken out or the proper torque is attained. Well, that's good information, but most of it is just good old common sense anyway. No matter how good you are at working those tongs, if they're not in good condition, they'll make you look like a dadgum amateur. Your best hedge against this is proper care. This'll make them last. You'll find that on most of our rigs, we use BJ or Webb Wilson tongs. Regardless of which tongs you're using now, there are basic things common to both brands. For instance, they have a hanger that attaches to a wire line. A lever, or the body of the tongs, is attached to the hanger. On the BJs, it's attached with a single bolt that acts like a hinge. Webb Wilsons use two adjustable bolts and a tongue to give a three-point attachment for leveling purposes. The hanger can be attached to the lever on either side, depending on whether the tongs will be used for make-up or breakout. Looking down on the lever, if it's positioned like this in relation to the pipe, it'll be a make-up tong. Flip it over, and it becomes a breakout tong. Attached to the lever is a long jaw and a short jaw. They're held in place with hinge pins. Now, you'll find a variety of different types in the field, but generally, the BJs will be a bolt type affair, and the Webb Wilsons will be a drop-in pin, held in place with a cotter pin. Whenever you're changing any of your joints on either of these tongs, check to make sure that your hinge pins fit snugly in the hinge pin holes. There shouldn't be any slop. That's what causes problems like this. There's a third type of hinge pin that you'll find on the larger Webb Wilsons, and you've got to be careful with it or you'll have problems. The pin itself is shorter than the hole it fits in. There are 2 snap rings that hold it in place. A lot of hands just tap the pin down until the top is even with the top of the jaw. This can be quite dangerous. Remember, if the hinge pin isn't tapped all the way down flush with its snap ring, the pin won't be able to give support to the lower portion of the hinge.
When I first went to work for Sedco, I was an assistant driller trainee in Iran. I'd been there about a week, and it was my first time on the floor, and we were tripping pipe. When they got to the collars, they put the tong on it, and then everybody ran and hid. The driller started torquing up on the collar, and all of a sudden, it just exploded. The tong head just blew off. A piece of it flew over and hit the assistant driller in the leg and broke his thigh bone. He went down like he'd been shot. Later on, I found out that what had happened was that they hadn't bumped the pin in the jaw up against the snap ring, that they'd left it up flush. And as a result, the bottom of the pin wasn't catching enough of the jaw, and all that torque on it just caused it to break apart and explode. At the time, I thought, my God, is this the kind of thing you got to go through all the time? Equipment exploding in your face, tongs breaking and blowing up. But later on, through experience, and seeing it happen over and over again, I realized that as long as you had your tong on there properly, and the pin was in the jaw properly, this kind of thing never had to happen.
Make sure those hinge pins are installed properly and secured into place. And check to be sure that they fit snugly. For different sized drill pipe and collars, there are different sized components and different adjustments to be made to accommodate the pipe's diameter. Each of the tong manufacturers publishes bulletins to explain them. The last 2 components of the tongs are the latch and lug jaw. The latches and latch springs should be tight but free. Dirt accumulation can cause the latches to bind up, and that can be real irritating. All the springs should be strong enough to cause the latch to clamp down tight against the jaw. When the tongs are latched, the latch should close completely over the lug jaw lip. If it doesn't, the tongs aren't fitting around the pipe properly, and adjustments should be made. Now that's a smooth operation. It only happens when the tongs are working properly. Here's a close look at the tong Spencer Taylor commented on earlier. All of the segments are worn and loose. When this tong was first assembled, the hinge pin and hinge pin hole were a tight fit. A little lubrication once a day could have kept them that way a lot longer too. Once each day, the hinge pins should be lubricated. On Webb Wilson tongs, the grease fittings are located in the tops of the hinge pins. A couple of squirts per pin and you're set to go. BJs have lube points in the body of the tong instead of the hinge pin. Make sure you lubricate all points. There'll be a lube point at each hinge. Check the condition of your dies on a daily basis. Make sure that cotter pins or roll pins are in place to keep the dies from falling out. And don't weld the dies in place. This will permanently damage your tongs. Webb Wilson has a handy little tool they call a Tong die driver that makes die replacement a little easier. Dies are made out of tungsten carbide. They're real hard, but they're also brittle and they'll chip easily. You ought to wear some eye protection whenever you change the dies. Remove the cotter pins or tap the roll pin or die retainer pin out of the way. Set the wedged end of the die tool in the die groove and tap it. As it pushes the die out, it also recuts and cleans the die groove. If you don't have a Tong die driver, then you can use a punch or something that will get down into the groove. Place the die in the groove and tap it in. Don't forget to replace all of the cotter pins or to tap the roll pins or die retainer pins back into place. If it appears that your hinge pins are beginning to wear, change them. Worn hinge pins will cause the hinge pin hole to wear more quickly than it normally would. When the hinge pin holes wear down, the tong will have to be sent to the shop to be built back up and retooled. Okay, let's take a close look at a set of BJs. Now, notice the lug jaw. There are 3 hinge pin holes. This is adjustable depending on which size pipe you'll be using. During assembly or changeout of the lug jaw, double check all the hinge pins and holes to be sure there isn't any wear. And make sure that each pin has a nut and cotter pin. There's a stop bolt on the short jaw of some models that needs to be adjusted. Adjust it so that when the latch lug jaw is released, there's room for clearance of the pipe. Your tong line retainer fits in this end of the lever and is held in place by this tong line retainer bolt. As the bolt is tightened, the retainer moves closer to the end of the other half. After the tong has been hung, it'll need to be leveled. If it isn't, you'll have trouble latching it around the pipe. First, we'll balance it from end to end. Use this hanger adjustment set screw. Screw the set screw in or out until the tong is perfectly level. Now, to balance it from side to side. Use a wrench and turn the balancing screw either clockwise or counterclockwise until it sets level. Well, that ought to help you out if you happen to be using BJs. But if you use Webb Wilson, well, you need to know a little more. At first glance, your Webb Wilson AAXs will look a lot like BJs. The locations of the parts are the same, but there are some distinct differences. Take balancing, for example. There's no adjustment at the top of the hanger of a Webb Wilson. Remember earlier we mentioned that Webb Wilsons use a 3-point adjustment system? 2 bolts and a tongue? Well, this is where all of the adjusting takes place. Tighten both bolts equally to tilt the tongs upward, or loosen them to tilt downward. This will set your forward balance. Once that's set so that it's even from lever to latch, you can set the side balance. The tong jaws should be fully open. Then adjust the hanger so that the long jaw is about an inch lower than the short jaw. This will help avoid the possibility of the long jaw jackknifing when the tong is operated, and it makes the tong easier to use. Just like with the BJs, there are different sized lug jaws for different sizes of drill pipe. Make sure that the correct one is being used for the pipe you're dealing with. If you're using an incorrect lug jaw, the dies won't bite properly. This will cause chipping and breaking of dies and could damage your pipe. And when you're out there slinging those tongs around, remember what we've talked about. You don't want to look bad, and you don't want your rig to look bad either. Get good use out of those tongs, but don't let them eat away at your time and patience just to save a couple of bucks.